Imagine starting your morning by reading about a man who was dragged naked over pieces of broken pottery.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, breaking pottery and burning coals, and then being told, this is your role model for the day. Now go out there and be productive.
That is, I mean, that's a pretty far cry from the gentle mindfulness apps or, the daily affirmations we use today to get ourselves out of bed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But for centuries, that was the literal reality for readers of this deeply intense, sacred catalog. So today, we are doing a deep dive into how a 2,000-year-old institution used the most gruesome, visceral deaths in human history as basically a daily habit tracker.
Right.
And, perhaps even more surprisingly, why centuries later, that exact same institution suddenly decided to just pull the plug and edit its own Hall of Fame.
It really is a fascinating collision, of ancient devotion and modern bureaucracy, because we're exploring the Roman martyrology by month. And specifically, we have this incredible pair of bookends in our sources today. On one side, we've got the 1916 English edition, published by the Boston Catholic Journal, and that features an introduction by Cardinal Gibbons that explains the intense psychology behind reading this kind of text.
Right, and on the other side, and this is attached right to the modern online version of that exact same text, we have a furiously opinionated editorial note from 2019.
Oh, furious is the right word.
Yeah. This modern editor is absolutely livid about a Vatican decree from 1969 that just suddenly purged 131 saints from this very calendar.
So we are essentially watching a centuries-old monument of memory get subjected to, well, a modern administrative restructuring.
Right. And for you listening, this isn't just some niche history lesson about ancient Roman executions. It's a masterclass in how human beings use extreme examples of sacrifice to motivate themselves.
Definitely.
It forces us to ask, how do we decide who gets remembered as a hero? And, what happens when those heroes suddenly become a public relations liability for the people in charge?
Well, to really understand that friction, we have to start with the psychology of the text itself. Because before we get into the wild, blood-soaked stories of the martyrs, we need to understand what a martyrology actually is and, why anyone would willingly read it every single day.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because Cardinal Gibbons' 1916 introduction is incredibly helpful here. He frames this text as an official and accredited record. And he deliberately calls these martyrs the soldiers of Christ. He makes this really compelling argument by comparing this religious catalog to secular honors. He points out that the worldly secular world has its legions of honor.
Yes. He notes that men constantly erect monuments to earthly heroes. We build statues to generals and conquerors, even when those heroes are tainted with vice.
Right, or stained with blood.
Exactly. Simply because they achieved great success or showed extraordinary worldly talent.
Which leads to Gibbons' central question, right? If the world celebrates its flawed, violent heroes, why shouldn't the church sing the praises of those who actually overcame the world?
Yeah.
Like, why shouldn't eternity have its heroes, just like time does?
And what's fascinating here is the intended utility of that comparison, because Gibbons isn't just saying, hey, respect our guys too. He is arguing that these figures are meant to be active psychological models.
Yes, exactly.
He brings up St. Augustine, one of the most influential thinkers in Western history. Augustine had this profound crisis moment realization that ultimately led to his conversion.
Yeah.
He looked at the historical accounts of these martyrs and asked himself a very simple but devastating question. He said, if other men like me have attained to such sanctity, why not I?
If they can do it, why not me? I mean, it's such a raw, universally human question. Augustine is looking at people who were poor, afflicted, completely despised by Roman society, and he realizes they're winning this ultimate moral victory. Meanwhile, he says he is lying buried in his sloth, wasting his gifts on the world's evanescent honors.
And that word sloth is the absolute key to understanding the martyrology. The entire goal of this text, as Gibbons lays it out, is to cure spiritual laziness.
Wow.
It was designed to animate the despondent, console the afflicted, and lift the mind entirely away from the mundane struggles of the world. As the editor of the Boston Catholic Journal notes, quoting the ancient writer Tertullian, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church.
Which means the actual physical example of extreme sacrifice is, like, infinitely more potent than any eloquent sermon.
Precisely. You really have to understand the context of the Roman Empire to get why this works so well. Roman public execution wasn't just about punishing a crime.
It was a spectacle.
It was state-sponsored terrorism. The emperor wasn't just a king, he was considered divine. So refusing to sacrifice to the Roman gods wasn't just a religious disagreement. It was high treason.
So throwing Christians to the lions in the amphitheater was designed to be a highly visible, terrifying demonstration of what happens when you don't conform to the state.
Exactly. The Roman arena was a tool of political subjugation. It was meant to completely break the human spirit and terrify the populace into submission.
Right.
But the martyrology flips that entirely on its head by recording these deaths not as executions, but as glorious, victorious triumphs over the state. The text weaponizes historical heroism against everyday cowardice and laziness.
That is such a brilliant way to look at it. It turns the empire's ultimate weapon into a daily motivational tool. I mean, imagine using this as your daily habit tracker in 1916.
Right.
Instead of waking up, checking your phone, and reading a generic quote about, hustling or finding your peace, you start your morning by reading about someone who willingly gave, as the text literally says, every fiber of their being for their beliefs.
And Gibbons explicitly hopes that people from all walks of life will read this daily, from the throne to the hovel, from the philosopher to the peasant. He compares the effect to a soldier being inspired to rush to the cannon's mouth after reading the exploits of earthly military heroes.
It's basically a daily calibration of your moral compass. It forces you to look at your daily complaints. Your coffee is cold, your commute is annoying, your boss sent a passive-aggressive email.
Oh, yeah.
And you realize how incredibly trivial they are compared to someone literally being stretched over hot coals. It uses the absolute extreme edge of human endurance as your true north.
So if the goal is to inspire through extreme, visceral example, we have to look at what these daily reflections actually entail. Because let me tell you, the text does not pull its punches.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because honestly, looking at the calendar entries for January and February, they get really dark, really fast.
They do.
The sheer creativity of the cruelty is staggering. The entries constantly highlight this supernatural defiance against powerful Roman emperors, specifically naming tyrants like Diocletian, Decius, and Maximian.
And the physical torments detailed in these pages, they really force the reader to confront agonizing physical reality.
Just to give you a sense of what a reader was taking in over their morning coffee on January 14th, we read about St. Felix.
Oh, this one is rough.
Yeah. The text casually mentions he was stretched out, bound hand and foot, over snail shells and broken earthenware.
Snail shells?
Right. Then you have St. Blasius on February 3rd, who was suspended on a tree and lacerated with iron combs.
Or St. Agatha on February 5th. According to the text, she was buffeted, racked, dragged over pieces of broken earthenware and burning coals, and had her breasts cut off before finally consummating her sacrifice in a dark prison cell while praying.
The brutality is just unrelenting. But here is the thing that really stands out to me.
Right.
Right alongside all that historical gore, you have these incredible, almost cinematic miracles.
Yeah.
Like January 26th gives us St. Polycarp. The crowd was clamoring for his death in the amphitheater. The Roman judge condemns him to the flames, but the fire simply refuses to burn him.
It just avoids him entirely.
He stands there completely unharmed by the inferno, so they finally have to give up and just pierce him with a sword.
And we see that theme of miraculous immunity repeatedly. On January 15th, St. Maur miraculously walks on water to save a drowning boy. A prodigy the text notes was unheard of since the days of St. Peter.
Wait, reading this list, I have to interrupt here. Walking on water, fire that magically refuses to burn flesh, angels appearing in prison cells to heal wounds overnight. I mean, this sounds entirely fabricated to a modern ear.
Sure, I can see that.
It reads less like historical fact and more like Marvel comic book lore. I mean, look at St. Styrus on January 12th. The text says he's passing by a pagan idol. He breathes on it, makes the sign of the cross on his forehead, and the idol just spontaneously crashes to the ground.
Right.
Naturally, he is beheaded for it, but come on, breathing on an idol and it explodes.
Well, it's very easy to dismiss it as comic book lore from our modern scientific vantage point. But to an early Christian or even a reader in 1916, empirical, strictly verifiable historical accuracy wasn't the primary point of these stories. No, theological reality was.
What do you mean by theological reality?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, these stories follow a very specific narrative structure for a reason. As you noted, there is always a villainous judge, a horrific torture, a moment of miraculous immunity, and then an ultimate triumphant death.
Right, it's a formula.
Exactly. And this structure was a profound theological statement. It was a way of demonstrating that spiritual truth triumphs over physical, political reality.
So going back to what we said about the Roman Empire using the arena as state terrorism.
Yes.
By showcasing martyrs who either felt no pain in the flames or whose wounds were healed by angels, the text is fundamentally mocking that worldly authority.
Exactly. The Roman state claimed absolute authority over life and death. The sword and the fire were their ultimate arguments.
Right.
So when a story circulates that the emperor's hottest fire couldn't even singe the robes of an 80-year-old bishop like Polycarp, the message is clear. Your emperor's greatest weapons are completely useless against our God.
It totally neuters the state's power. It takes the victim and turns them into the victor on a cosmic scale.
Precisely.
Like when St. Martina, who actually has her feast day listed on both January 1st and January 30th, when she endures all these varied torments under the Emperor Alexander but refuses to yield, she isn't losing. She is defeating the emperor.
And that is exactly what Cardinal Gibbons meant when he said these martyrs trampled upon the world. The gruesome details prove the cruelty and illegitimacy of the state, and the miracles prove the supremacy of God. It's a highly deliberate, highly effective framing of history.
So these superhero-like stories worked beautifully for centuries. They inspired millions of people to endure their own struggles by looking at these larger-than-life figures. But as the world entered the scientific, empirical age of the 20th century, I imagine the Vatican started looking at stories of guys breathing on idols to make them explode and thought, this might be a PR problem.
Yeah, that brings us perfectly to the incredible shift in our sources. We move from ancient Rome to 1960s Rome. To understand this, we have to look at a document issued by Pope Paul VI.
Okay.
It is a motu proprio titled Mysteri Paschalis, dated February 14th, 1969, and it took effect on January 1st, 1970.
Now, a motu proprio, just to clarify for anyone unfamiliar with Vatican terminology, is a decree issued by the Pope on his own initiative. It's basically a top-down executive order.
Correct. It is a direct exercise of administrative power. And this specific document essentially initiated a massive top-down purge of the calendar. 131 saints were suddenly deleted from the universal Roman martyrology.
So what does this all mean? The reasoning provided by the Vatican is just fascinating here.
It really is.
The document states that over the course of centuries, the feasts of the saints had become more and more numerous. The calendar was basically too crowded.
Yeah, overloaded.
Right. So the Vatican decreed that removing these saints was, and I'm quoting the text directly here, more in harmony with the piety and the needs of our times.
The needs of our times. It is a phrase that perfectly encapsulates the cultural anxiety of the 1960s.
You really have to put yourself in that decade. The 1960s brought the space race, the scientific revolution, massive social upheaval.
Everything was changing.
The church was terrified of bleeding relevance. They wanted to sit at the table with modern science and modern philosophy.
Exactly. And this was the era of Vatican II, a massive landmark council in the 1960s aimed at dragging the church into the modern world. Paul VI's decree argued that reducing the calendar would better reflect the universality of the church by proposing the names of only the most historically verifiable, universally important saints.
Right, they wanted hard evidence.
They argued that streamlining it would actually contribute to the spiritual well-being of the modern Christian, who might be alienated by some of the more fantastic legends.
It is literally a corporate restructuring of heaven. The institution decides to optimize its legacy. But I want to read some of the names from the removed list provided at our source just to show you, the listener, who actually got cut.
Go for it.
Because it wasn't just obscure figures. February 14th, St. Valentine.
Removed.
July 25th, St. Christopher.
Gone.
Removed. October 21st, St. Ursula and her companions. Removed.
St. Valentine and St. Christopher. I mean, these are names with massive centuries-old devotions attached to them. St. Christopher medals were in millions of cars around the world.
It is incredible to see modern institutional efficiency collide so violently with ancient devotion. And just looking at this strictly as outside observers analyzing a text, the friction here is unbelievable.
Truly.
You don't have to take a side in Catholic theology to see how violently these two worldviews are colliding on the page.
This raises an important question about how institutions handle their own history. And just to make it crystal clear to you listening, we are impartially reporting this internal Catholic dispute.
Absolutely.
We are not endorsing the Vatican's decree, nor are we endorsing the editor's claim of cultural bias that we're about to discuss. We are simply observing the fascinating ideological clash contained in the source text.
Right. Which brings us to the final, most explosive piece of our source material. The incredibly furious editorial note appended to this list of purged saints by Jeffrey K. Mondello, the editor of the Boston Catholic Journal, written in 2019.
And he does not hold back.
Not at all.
He is looking back at what the Vatican did in 1969, and he is absolutely seething.
He is. He calls the 1969 decree a culturally and ecumenically biased omission. He insists that simply deleting their names from a calendar does not mean these saints never existed.
Right.
He argues passionately that a bureaucratic deletion does not negate their historical persons, their sanctity, or their miracles.
He specifically claims that these 131 saints simply became, in his words, inconvenient for the post-conciliar Church of Vatican II.
Inconvenient is the perfect word for his argument. He is pointing out exactly what we discussed earlier. Many of the saints on the remove list, like St. Christopher or St. Ursula, have legends surrounding them that are highly miraculous and lack hard empirical documentation compared to modern historical standards.
Right. The Vatican wanted a cleaner, more historically verifiable list, so they wouldn't look foolish to the modern secular world.
But the editor is saying, you can't just sanitize our history because it makes you uncomfortable at modern cocktail parties.
Yeah.
He is arguing that the spiritual reality and the centuries of historical devotion are what actually matter. He explicitly tells his readers that, with full justification, these removed saints can and should still be invoked. He is outright rejecting the bureaucratic edit in favor of unbroken tradition.
It perfectly illustrates a universal truth about history. The curation of memory is never a neutral act. Every time a list of heroes is created, amended, or purged, it reflects the anxieties and values of the people doing the editing just as much as it reflects the people on the list.
So true.
Cardinal Gibbons valued the visceral inspiration of ancient martyrs in 1916 because he wanted to fight spiritual laziness. Pope Paul VI valued universality, historical accuracy, and modernization in 1969 because he wanted to speak to a scientific age.
And the modern editor values unyielding tradition because he feels the sacred has been sacrificed for public relations.
Exactly.
It is wild to think about the journey of this text. We started this deep dive in the blood-soaked amphitheaters of the Roman Empire. We watched early Christians document saints being dragged over broken pottery and surviving the flames to defy worldly emperors.
Yeah.
And then we ended up at the highly polished bureaucratic desks of 1960s Rome, watching those exact same saints get erased from the calendar with the stroke of a pen.
The Roman martyrology truly is a fascinating lens into what human beings value. It shows us how deeply we rely on memorials of extreme sacrifice to motivate our daily lives. Whether it was St. Augustine curing his sloth in the 4th century, or a 20th century reader finding the courage to face their mundane workday.
And it shows how fiercely we will fight over the curation of that memory when someone tries to change it. For you listening right now, whether you consider yourself religious or not, this deep dive really forces you to think about who sits on your own personal roll of honor.
We all have one, whether we consciously write it down or not. We all have figures from history or our own lives that we use as benchmarks.
Exactly. Who are the heroes you look up to? How does their example shape the way you live your daily life? Are you using them to cure your own spiritual sloth, as Cardinal Gibbons would say?
And perhaps more importantly, how often do you edit that list as your own values change over time? Who have you quietly dropped from your own calendar?
Right. Which leaves us with a final thought I want you to mull over today as you go about your life. The ancient men and women described in this text willingly gave every fiber of their being.
They really did.
They endured the rack, the fire, and the sword to ensure their message and their defiance outlasted the greatest empires on earth. How do you think they would feel knowing that, centuries later, their ultimate legacy was subject to an administrative edit just to fit the needs of our times? We always say that history decides who gets remembered as a hero, but it turns out history always has an editor.